The following is a special presentation on AZTV 7.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This AZTV special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2022 midterm election. We'll be talking with candidates and data analysts to give you insight into who and what is on the ballot. Today we're talking with the frontrunners in the Republican gubernatorial race, Karrin Robson and Kari Lake. Now, both candidates are in a competitive race to be the Republican nominee. The polls are narrowing, and this race is really heating up. First up is Karrin Robson, business owner and former member of the Board of Regents. And then we will have Kari Lake, 27 years in the media here in Arizona, and has been the front runner in this race since the very beginning of the primary. Plus, we're going to be talking with the Chief of Research for OH Predictive Insights. His name is Mike Noble. We're talking about the demographic change with independent voters in Arizona and how it affects this election. We've got a lot of information that you need to know. These are going to be interesting conversations. You're not going to want to miss 1 minute of this show, so stick around. We will be back here in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us now, gubernatorial candidate Karrin Robson. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike.
So much has been changing. Supreme Court decisions, so we've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's start with the economy. Arizona, still number one issue is economy. Where do you stand with what the budget that was passed? How do you like it? And what would you do with it, or differently?
Well, it's always about the economy. I mean, every election in my adult lifetime, at the end of the day, it comes down to the economy. And right now, Arizonans are suffering in the Biden economy. And you know, people are worried about, you know, filling up their gas tank and going to the grocery store. And now they're having to choose between the two. In fact, I know people who can't even make it to work because they can't afford to fill up their gas tank. And I believe that will be a primary issue in this campaign. And voters will decide. And I think they've had enough of the disastrous economic policies of Joe Biden. Here in Arizona, we did get a much larger budget this year. It's kind of an unusual year. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm thrilled with growing a budget. I'm not, because my political philosophy is low taxes, low regulatory environment, and allowing the citizens of Arizona to keep as much money in their pocket as possible. And so I would be inclined to take a knife to the budget.
So let's talk about specific parts, because now that we have changes with what the Supreme Court has said about Remain in Mexico, that's going to really dramatically affect us. And there has been a lot of money allocated for border security in the Arizona state budget. How do you feel about that addition, and how should that be utilized?
Well, I think that addition was warranted, prudent, and very necessary. The priority in my campaign, and I talk about it everywhere I go, is the border and border security. In fact, I was in 2 events last week with 200 people each, and to a T, everybody asked me a question about the border. I have a tough 6-point plan, and the first thing I will do is call an emergency session of our legislature, and we will find whatever resources necessary to keep the people and property in Arizona safe, and that means supporting our local law enforcement on the borders. I was very glad to see Sheriff Daniels in Cochise County got additional money for his jail. He's been asking for money for many, many years to upgrade and improve and expand his jail. Those are the kind of things we need to do. We need to provide them the resources, because after all, Arizona is on the front lines of what is now a 50-state border war. I'm done calling it a border crisis. It is a border war, because not only have we have people coming now from 140 countries from around the globe, they're bringing with them just death and destruction, and the fentanyl alone. I mean, that's, you read about it every single day. I hear about it. Rarely does a day or a week go by that I don't hear another tragic story about a fentanyl death. And Arizona is on the front lines, so we will send resources down there. We will construct the wall where we can, and I've made it extremely clear that any city in this state that attempts to declare themselves a sanctuary city, we will defund that city. Now, they shouldn't be doing it, but if they do, I wanted to be clear where I stand on this. And I'll also be reaching out to other governors, because it is a 50-state problem, and governors everywhere are now having to deal with it. While we're being overrun, they also, in their cities, and the fentanyl issue, they're paying a price as well. And so I will look to them for help because we're paying a disproportionate price.
Would you continue the border strike force as the governor has put it together with other governors? Would you continue that, or would you do something different with it?
I would continue it. I would continue it. I've talked about sending National Guard to the border. The National Guard would be there to support and help the local law enforcement who have jurisdiction in the border region.
So let's talk about a couple of the other important issues. Roe v. Wade, now a big issue in the states. We're now going back to a 1901 law. Is that sufficient to go back that far to a piece of legislation, or does more need to be done?
Well, I'll just for the record say that notwithstanding what other people might say about me, I am 100% pro-life. I always have been, and I always will be. And when I'm governor, Arizona will continue to be one of the most pro-life states in the nation. I also believe that we need to, I will lead and foster a culture of life in this state. We will be as concerned about the woman walking into an abortion clinic as we are about her unborn baby. We have to do everything we can to let women know that they have nonviolent alternatives when they are in crisis. Now, relative to what law is on the books, there's lawsuits that are being filed. The Attorney General just has one position, the governor has another position, so there is some uncertainty going on right now as to what law is in effect. But I will just go back to say, when I'm governor, Arizona will continue to be one of the most pro-life states in the nation, and we will find resources to help women that are in crisis. Texas, in fact, just this past year, allocated $100 million to the Texas Alternatives to Abortion Act. And we need to do something similar so that women know they have choices.
On education, Arizona has expanded the ESA program, the voucher program. I had somebody on from the American Federation for Children that said we are now the gold standard for school choice in the country, and other countries should follow our lead. Do you agree with that, and what do we do?
We are the gold standard for school choice, to be sure. I have been an advocate of school choice for many, many years. In fact, 18 years ago, I was appointed to the Great Hearts School Board when we had one school. Great Hearts now has 23 schools with thousands of kids on a waiting list. Parents want to choose, and we have over 50% of our kids already going to a school other than the one they're assigned. So that tells me that Arizona parents want to choose, and we have been a leader in school choice, and we will continue to do that. In fact, I want to make sure that the money our taxpayer dollars follow the child into the classroom and then let it filter up to the administration, as opposed to the system we have now where all the money goes into the top, into the administration, and it trickles down to the classroom. And by the time it gets there, it's not sufficient. We've got to pay our teachers more. The good teachers, if we paid them like we wanted to keep them, we wouldn't have a teacher shortage. And so Arizona is going to lead the way and show the rest of the country how to do it.
So would you expand, I know you said you take a knife to the budget, but on that alone, would you expand education spending if it was ensured that teachers were getting more pay?
Well, I'll tell you, we will have the resources necessary to improve our education. But if money was the only determinant, Detroit would have the best outcomes in the country because they spend more money per child than any other district, and yet they have a 6% reading proficiency rate. We're going to look at what the outcomes are that we want, then we're going to figure out how to get there, and then we'll figure out what it costs. So I'm not going to start with the conclusion that we need more resources. If we do need more resources, after understanding what it is we want and how we're going to get there, then we'll find more resources. But I'm not going to start with that conclusion.
I appreciate the time on these really important issues, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with Before You Vote. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. Coming up next, we're looking at the demographic change with independent voters here in Arizona, plus how it will affect the upcoming election. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Let's go to our Tracking Arizona segment with Mike Noble from OH Predictive Insights. This week, we are tracking demographics. Mike, there's been a big shift. The #1 voting demographic in the Maricopa County area is independent voters over Republicans and then Democrats. Does that surprise you?
Well, first, thanks for having me back, Mike. And absolutely, it surprises me because typically it's a fight between the red team and the blue team. However, right now, independents not only are the fastest growing demographic group, but also becoming one of the most important groups when it comes to their ability to play or vote in these primary elections, but also for the all-important general election, they just now have a bigger thumb on the scale.
So independent voters can choose either one of the two primaries to vote in. How important is it for each party to attract those voters in the primary, or is it most important that they just do it in the general?
Well, in the primary right now, in any given race, it's roughly around 15% of the vote is independent in those primaries, but they're typically already, either Republicans or Democrats that are voting in it. They're just registered as independents. But I think long term, that could be something that upsets the apple cart, where these independents, they could, grow in strength and start participating in these primaries, where they can really start having an impact on what type of candidates are coming out of the Democrats or Republicans, respectively, from an ideological standpoint.
Do they shift? I mean, do they vote in the Republican primary and then maybe vote Democrat in the general, or once they choose, are they pretty much staying there?
People would say they've been with a party. They typically don't move too much, the ones that actually vote in primaries. But when it comes to the general election, when you look at those all-important independent voters, it's kind of a misnomer, because when you look at independents, it's a false positive, because when you look at a lot of different races, it'll be about 25% are Republican, 25% Democrat, but about half are the true independents, and those are the truly persuadable, non-party loyal that are a small group. And even though, look at our U.S. Senate race, hundreds of millions of dollars we spent, a lot of that race is going to be decided on those all-important, persuadable independent voters.
So are the partisan candidates, do they have to be leery that they could chase independent voters away? Are there things they can do to actually chase them away?
They're already doing that. Why else are the registration numbers rising for independents and not for Democrats and Republicans? It's basically, it's like two siblings that are battling with each other, and you're just kind of stuck in the middle, and you really don't want to be in the middle of those two. So they're kind of running from the two parties and running to the independents, but there's currently not really a home for them, so they're sitting as independents right now.
As always, Mike, I appreciate the insight. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, coming up next, my conversation with leading Republican gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake. Find out where she is on Arizona's top issues. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before Your Vote. Joining me, Republican candidate for governor Kari Lake. Welcome.
How are you, Mike? It's
First
good to
of all,
be here.
Very strange that I'm interviewing you. Very strange.
It is strange to be back
this.
on a TV set after 30 years doing TV, 27 in Arizona, but good to be here.
Let's talk about the issues. Number one issue for everybody all across the board, doesn't matter what the demographic, has been the economy. Let's start there. What can the governor of Arizona do to take Arizona to the next level economically? And is there anything you can do as governor to influence inflation?
We're already doing a great job economically, and I will give Governor Doug Ducey credit where credit is due. He's created a great environment for business. He's lowered our taxes, and we're going to keep doing that when I'm governor. We want to continue to reduce some of the regulation to make it easier for businesses to thrive. And one thing I will vow to all of the people of Arizona is I will never shut your business down. I mean, talk about making things difficult. When you shut your business down and you have to crawl out of a hole because you've watched your life savings that you put into that business dissipate as you try to survive, that really hurt a lot of people. And they're still feeling the effects of that. And now we're hit with Joe Biden's economy, which is a disaster. And I always take things back, Mike, you know where I'm going to go. We're having this problem with Bidenflation because we have corrupt elections. I'll say it until my last dying breath. Our 2020 election was corrupt. If we do not deal with that election, if we do not deal with making sure we have honest elections, we'll continue to get people like Joe Biden in office. And because he's in office, he's ruining our economy. He's destroying our energy plan. We were energy independent. He's destroying what we had at the border, which was a border that was secure. And when we don't address corruption and fraud in our elections, then we end up with a problem like we have today. So I will address that. We will address the elections and make sure they're honest.
So then let me go there. I was going to go to the border next, but let's go to the election integrity issue. There have been some bills that have been proposed that didn't make it. There were some that got vetoed. But what is something that can get both sides of the aisle to feel comfortable that the elections are fair? What are just a couple of things that need to happen to make the elections fair?
Well, I think we need to go back to Election Day. instead of election month and a half. That's how our Constitution is written. It calls for election day, not election month and a half, with then ballots being accepted after election day, which is what happened in 2020. So we'll go back to election day, we go back to paper ballots and hand counting. Or there's other ways we can count that don't involve software, because we all know if you have a computer at home, if you have a phone, it's easy to hack anything with software. And I'm currently involved in a lawsuit to try to get rid of those electronic election counting machines, because we know they can be hacked, we know that they're not secure, and we know that their components are made by our enemies in China and other nations. And so we don't want to put our sacred vote, 100% of it, into a electronic voting machine with software that can be hacked and rely on them to count our vote. 2017, it was the Democrats who were railing against them. Kamala Harris said she witnessed in front of her own eyes one of these electronic voting machines being hacked. So we just want to have secure elections. Go back to the small precincts where we used to vote. Maybe it was at the school down the street. Maybe it was at the church across the way. During COVID, they used COVID to shut our schools and churches down, and that pushed us into these huge voting centers where it was very easy to commit fraud. So we kind of want to go back to the way we used to do it. France just did it. They had a very successful election. They had no complaints or problems with corruption.
All right, so let's go now to the border issue, because interesting, with all the candidates on the Republican side of the aisle, I think most of them agree on the issues, but how you attack the issues is different. So how do you attack the border issue? How is your plan different and more effective than some of your opponents?
My opponent's plan, if you like what Governor Ducey's doing on the border, then you'll like what my opponent is doing, the 6-point plan or whatever. It's basically the same thing as Governor Ducey's doing, which is a half measure rather than a full measure. We have to make a full measure here. We've got to finish President Trump's wall. There's about 18 to 20 miles left. We need to put our Arizona National Guard troops on the border and arm them and stop people from coming across. And we need to use surveillance, drones and such, to see where these massive groups of people are coming. Just a couple nights ago, we had a group of 100+ people charge the border. We didn't have enough people in place to stop them and process them. And we could have seen that. With a drone, you can see where people are coming. So we're going to do that. We're going to take back the remedy, which is right there in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. If we're being invaded, we, the states, can protect our people and protect our border, because the government's not doing it. The guarantee clause of the U.S. Constitution requires the government protect us from invasion, and they're not doing it. And so it's going to fall back on the states. But we're not going to sit here and allow the narco-terrorists to have operational control of our border. We're not going to allow them to pump record amounts of fentanyl in to poison our children and our young people. And we're not going to allow the largest invasion in the history of this country on our home soil to happen under my watch. And that's why my border plan is the best. We consulted with the very best people when it comes to border security and the top constitutional attorneys in this country to put this plan together. And it will stand up in the Supreme Court. And we will probably end up there. But I'm ready to take on that fight. And we need a fighter, not somebody who's going to do a half measure, a dog and pony show at the border. We've already seen that. We're done with that.
Last question is about education. Not only the quality of education in Arizona, which really needs to be ramped up, but now we are adding in school security in the conversations with everyone. How do you attack that as governor, working with the legislature to secure our schools and make sure these kids are getting the best education possible?
Really should have been done already. Think about it. And I know you haven't been in media as long as I was in news, but I covered Columbine, and I've covered many, many school shootings.
Sandy Hook was my first.
It's just, I get goosebumps thinking about it. It's so awful. And we've sat here and had our children sitting ducks because our lawmakers back in D.C. haven't done a damn thing about it. They're all secured with armed security, and they want to make gun-free zones, our schools gun-free zones. Frankly, as a mom, I want to know there's somebody on campus who's armed to take out one of these lunatics. And they've done nothing. It was a $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan. Can you imagine if we would have put some money into securing our schools? I know there's retired lawmen and retired military who would gladly volunteer for that job to protect their grandkids or children. We have to make it a priority, and if we have to do it at the state level, we will. I will sign legislation to protect our schools, but I will not sign any legislation to expand these sitting duck zones, gun-free zones. I just saw a sign, I think it was at a Texas school, and it basically said, there's armed people in this building. So if you're going to come in here like a madman and try to shoot this place up, you're going out either in a body bag or on a stretcher, but you're not going to kill our kids. And we're not going to take our Second Amendment of rights away from people. They're trying to disarm the citizenry of this country. And we're not going to let them do that at a time when we need to protect our families, because we don't have enough police officers in this country right now, and our children and our families are at risk because of the rising level of crime in our community.
I appreciate the time. It always runs out so fast, but thanks for doing this, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Let's do it. Thanks.
All right, we'll be right back with more of Before You Vote. Stick around. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Thank you to our gubernatorial candidates and to Mike Noble for joining us today. We want to leave you with some important information to help guide you through this midterm election. Mail-in ballots are in the process of being sent out. If you'd like to request a mail-in ballot, the last date to do so, July 22nd. To find out how to request one, head over to aztv.com/vote. There you'll also find other resources such as candidate information. And remember, if you're registered as an independent voter and you'd like to vote in a primary, you need to choose which party you would like to cast your vote for. Next week, we'll be talking with candidates for the Democratic gubernatorial race, Marco Lopez and Katie Hobbs. Join us next week on Before You Vote.